Hello and welcome to finalize your year-end payroll. If you're here, it's likely your first time completing this process, so I want to make sure I set you up for success. We're going to look at this process like making a cake. You can't make a cake successfully unless you prepare the ingredients and follow certain steps. So I'm going to talk you through each of the important steps we recommend you take to navigate the year-end payroll process in Xero. I'm joined today by many of our wonderful customer experience team. They'll all be looking after the Q&A today, so feel free to ask your questions via the Q&A panel, which you can find at the bottom of your screen in your Zoom control panel. Please note, chat has been disabled, so you will need to use that Q&A box instead. You'll have access to an on-demand recording of today's session within a few days. And you can also check out our short video on STP finalization, which is available now, and the link will be in the chat shortly. So just take in as much as you can today with the opportunity to watch it again later via either the recording or the short video. So as mentioned, today I'll be going through each of the 4 steps that we recommend for completing your year-end payroll. First, we'll look at reviewing important details in Xero, like your business and employee details. Next is to reconcile. Before finalizing anything for year end, it's important to make sure everything reconciles. So I'll show you which Xero reports to run. I'll then talk about the STP finalization process. And we'll finish off by looking at adjustments that may need to be made, which will be the last step of our process. We also have a helpful checklist that you can download to make sure you've completed everything. So I'll ask my colleague Nicole to also please to add that link into the chat as well. So you should see that there in the chat box as well in a second. So feel free to open that up now when you see it if you wish, and you can then have that checklist to follow along with as I go through today's webinar. Now, before we get into it, I'd like to see how confident you are currently with this process. So I'm going to launch a poll now. So you should see that there on your screen now. Now, if you can't see it, it might be hiding behind another window or on a second screen if that is what your setup is like. So I'll give you a minute or so to answer that. We do have over 2,000 of you on the call today, so I'll give you some time to answer. So how confident are you with completing a year-end payroll using Xero? See lots of participation there. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. Perfect. I'll give you another 10 seconds there. Got nearly 90% of you have participated. There might still be some of you trying to find the poll if it's hiding behind a window or maybe up on another screen. Okay, 5, 4. Perfect. I'll end that now. And I'll share the results. So we do have a mixture of confidence levels, as you'll see now once that's shared. So we can see that most of you are somewhat confident, which is a good place to be. And we do have 15% of you who are not confident. 31% who are confident, and we have a very small percentage, so only 9% of you who are actually very confident. So we definitely want to increase the overall confidence levels by today, which I'm optimistic that we can do. And remember to ask your questions via the Q&A box throughout as well, which I can see a lot of questions are dropping in there that the team are getting onto very quickly. So thanks team for that, and thanks everyone for asking questions. So the first step is to review before finalizing your payroll. This includes reviewing your organization details while you want to confirm the legal or trading name, the ABN, the branch number, and the postal address, including the postcode. If you do need to make changes, you can do this via organization details. Now, you may feel confident that these details are correct, but it's always a good idea just to check these things to be 100% sure. For employee details, you want to run the employee contact details report. And what you're checking in that report is that employees have a correct date of birth and postcode and that everything else looks correct. So making sure they have an employment and income type and tax scale. This helps to reduce filing errors during finalization. Any changes can be made in the Details tab of an employee's records. Lastly, let's check that all of your pay items in your payroll settings are correct. So we're going to jump into Xero to have a closer look at this. So we're going to go to our payroll settings from our payroll menu. And then we're going to go into our pay items tab. So we'll start at the top of the list here with the earnings tab. So here you want to make sure that the earnings category is correct. Now, you might have already done this as part of transitioning to STP phase 2, but it is something that we do recommend checking as part of this finalization process as well. Now, you won't be able to edit the category if it's been used in a pay run. So if you do need to adjust this, you'll need to create a new earnings rate, select the correct category, and process an adjustment to move amounts across. And I am going to be showing you an example of that a bit later on in the session. Lastly, to make sure your activity statements are reporting payroll information, review the reportable as W1 column. So just make sure that all of the yeses and nos are correct there. If you do need to change anything, you just do it from the overflow menu. You can go into edit, scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see the tick box there to tick or untick as needed. And of course, don't forget to click save. For the deductions tab, you also want to check that the category here is correct. So for example, if you want a deduction to be reported as workplace giving, then when you added the deduction, you needed to have selected workplace giving as the category. Deductions shown as other or none aren't reported to the ATO, just like they weren't with payment summaries. And don't forget to check that the yeses and nos are correct in the excluded from W1 column again. You can edit those from the overflow menu, just like we did in the earnings tab. Now there's nothing to flag for reimbursements, but in the leave tab, you want to make sure that you've assigned a leave category to each of your active leave pay items. The category determines how the payment is reported to the ATO through STP. If you need to assign or change a category, you can do that from the overflow menu. So let's just show you that for long service leave here. We can go to edit and then you'll be able to change the category there. Once you've reviewed your details, it's time to move on to the second step, which is to reconcile your payroll transactions to your accounts. Some checks we recommend doing before you start reconciling are firstly, checking that all of your pay runs for the financial year have been posted and filed to the ATO with STP. Then review the payment dates of pay runs to ensure they're within the correct financial year, as it's the payment date that determines when the pay run will be reported, not the pay period end date. So for example, if the pay period ends on the 28th of June 2022, but the payment date is the 2nd of July 2022, then it won't be reported in the 2022 financial year as the payment date falls outside of this. Check any money owed to employees for the financial year have been paid. For example, any adjustment to their wages, or maybe you just haven't made the payment for their last pay period. Make sure to reconcile any transactions relating to payroll that appear on your bank statement, like wages, PAYG, superannuation, or a JobKeeper payment, so that everything is included when you run your reports. And lastly, make sure opening balances have been entered if required. I'll go into more detail about opening balances soon. Once you've done all those checks, you're ready to run your reports to make sure everything reconciles. So let's take a look at this in Xero. So you can access your payroll reports in the Report Center by going to the Accounting menu, into our reports, and then scrolling down to the Payroll Report section. Now, the first report to use is this Payroll Activity Summary Report. So let's open that up. I'll change the date range to the last financial year and update. And this report shows total amounts for each pay item. So you can check total earnings and deductions for the relevant period. Hopefully, since you've done the checks in the review phase, you won't have to make any changes here. But if you do notice something amiss, go back to the Pay Items tab in Payroll Settings, make the updates you need, and then run your report again to see the changes. Let's head back to our reports page just by using this breadcrumb here. Now, the other report to review is the trial balance report. For this one, I'm going to use the search function, but you can find that under taxes and balances in that section of reports. The trial balance report shows the balances of your general ledger accounts at your chosen date. Now, since this isn't a payroll report, payroll admins need to have standard plus reporting permissions to run this one. So if needed, contact a user who can run it for you. Now, we're running this report for the 30th of June, but just make sure that you're checking the date range when you're running your report. And what you would do with this report is to go in and check that the balance matches with the amounts in the payroll activity summary. For example, I would want to check that the total wages and salaries on my trial balance report matches with the earnings on my payroll activity summary report. We do actually have a handy chart for you to match the totals on the payroll activity summary report with the totals on the trial balance report. Now, do keep in mind that if you have multiple accounts, say you have wage accounts for each of your store locations, then you need to add all of these accounts together in your trial balance report to get the total earnings. Going forward, if you do have multiple wage accounts, consider using Xero's tracking categories instead if they suit your needs, because this means you only need one wage account, but will still be able to report on multiple cost centers or locations. Now, the next report we're going to look at is the account transactions report. So let's go back using that reports breadcrumb to our report center. And I actually have this account transactions report favorited, so we can jump straight in there. Now let's customize our options here. So under accounts, I'm going to select wages and salaries. I'm going to change the date range to the last financial year and update that. Now, this report shows amounts for the selected period for transactions coded to your accounts depending on the transaction date. Now, the reason I want to show you this report is that if you find some amounts that don't match, the first thing you can do is use this report to check if all transactions look right. So for example, if you're looking at the wages and salaries account, which we are at the moment, it usually only has debit transactions from pay runs. So by going through the transactions, you can spot anything odd here, like a credit transaction sitting here, for example. In comparison, the liability accounts would have both debit and credit transactions, and it should reach a zero balance. Now, you might be wondering what you should do if the totals don't match. Well, the best way to do this is to run both the payroll activity summary and the general ledger reports at the end of each month, starting with July, then move on to August and so on. Do this month by month until you find the period of time when the totals went out of balance. Once you've found the period of variance, here's a few things that you can look for. Transactions that have been reconciled to expense accounts instead of liability accounts. And look for manual journals that have been posted to an account used for payroll, including those for ETPs if you've processed ETPs outside of payroll. Now, that last point is relevant if you started using Xero Payroll partway through the financial year. Check your payroll opening balances and conversion balances in case they've been duplicated. For example, you've entered opening balances, but also processed the same or overlapping amounts in pay runs, meaning these wages have effectively been recorded twice. And if you can't find what's causing the variance, we recommend reaching out to your bookkeeper, accountant, or professional association for more troubleshooting help. Step 3 is finalize your STP data. Businesses using single touch payroll will need to finalize employee wages, PAYG, and superannuation for the financial year by completing an STP finalization. I'm going to first show you how to report opening balances in STP submissions. So you'll need to report opening balances If, for example, you switched to Xero midway through the year from another software, or weren't using an accounting software previously, and you weren't filing with STP before you moved to Xero. The year-to-date figures from the beginning of this financial year up to the time when you started using STP still need to be reported by single touch payroll. If you move to Xero midway through the year and you've completed an STP finalization in your previous software, then you won't need to include opening balances in STP reporting. I'll also show you the prepare screen where you want to ensure each step in the checklist has been reviewed and completed. The review screen where you'll review each employee's year-to-date summary for accuracy and enter any required reportable fringe benefits amounts. And then how to submit the finalization to the ATO. Now, before we have a look at this process in Xero, I'm just curious how many of you have actually completed a year-end payroll finalization process before, whether it was in Xero or elsewhere. So I'm just going to launch another poll now. And you should see that pop up about now. So have you completed a year-end payroll finalization process before? Yes, in Xero. Yes, but not in Xero. And maybe you just have never done one of these anywhere. So I'll give you all a minute or so to answer. We have nearly 80% of you have already responded, which is great. Thank you, everyone. Okay, I'll give you another 10 seconds or so. Perfect. I will end that poll in 3 seconds. Amazing. Okay, so it looks like actually over half of you have actually completed this process in Xero before. 14% of you have done it before, but not in Xero. And there are quite a big portion of you, so 22% of you have never actually done this process before. So definitely a mix. And for those of you who have done this in Xero before, it is a little bit different this year anyway. So it will probably still be a bit new to you. So let's jump in and have a look. So we're back in Xero again, but I'm just going to switch to a different demo company for this part. Okay, so we're going to go to the payroll menu and into single touch payroll. Let's give it a second to load. Perfect. So we are in the overview tab. And here when it loads, sorry, I think it's just because I changed the organization, it will take a second. So in the overview tab, we can see the status of our pay runs and our finalization. So we can see any pay runs or finalization that would be needing attention here, and then those that we've filed. So we can see that we've got some filed pay runs down here, and we've got some employees not yet finalized. But first, I'm just going to show you how to report opening balances. So you can do that from the overflow menu. So these 3 dots here, and we go to our STP settings. Now we do land on the ATO connection tab. So we're just going to jump into the opening balances tab here. And then this is where you can indicate whether or not to include opening balances in STP submissions. So we're going to go back to our overview tab. So using this single touch payroll breadcrumb. And now we're ready to go to finalization. So we can do that just from the button here, go to finalization, or by jumping straight into the finalization tab. So first you want to make sure that you have the correct tax year selected. Now, if you are coming back here after the financial year, maybe to fix an employee, then just make sure to change that. If you have terminated employees included in your finalization that were filed under STP Phase 1, you'll see a list of those employees here at the top in a separate table. And you can finalize those employees separately. Next, we have our list of employees. So everyone you expect to see here should be here. If you do notice that an employee is missing from this list, it may be due to their employment start date or employment basis. So you should review those details in their employee profile. Now, at the very bottom of the page, you'll notice this toggle. And if you toggle this on, it'll show any employees that were terminated throughout the FBT year but didn't earn wages, in case you need to report their FBT. And you have a handy checklist available as well. So if you click on this Prepare Your Payroll button, and then just make sure that you've done all of those reviews that you can see are suggested on the right-hand side. And each of those review buttons actually brings you to that section of Xero to update or review. So if you were to click on Review Employees, for example, it'll bring us to the relevant employees section, so we can update that there. And of course, you can click into any of those many blue links that are showing throughout the checklist if you do want to read more information on a certain area on Xero Central. So that's very helpful. So we'll X out of that for now, and that's our prepare step done. So we can get on to our review step. So we'll scroll down here to our list of employees. Now there's no limit to how many employees you can finalize at once. So you could just do one employee by selecting that relevant employee or a selection. Or if you want to select them all, you can just do that using the checkbox at the very top of the list. Once you've selected employees, you'll be able to click Start Finalization down here at the bottom right. So let's click on that to bring us to our review screen. So here we can view the year-to-date summary for any of the employees just by clicking into them. So let's have a look at Oliver Gray and Oliver's year-to-date summary. So we can see all the details here that are required by the ATO, like the TFN and his payments for the year. So if I scroll down, we can see all of those amounts. Now, most of the amounts do come from posted pay runs, like lump sums, any employment termination payments and rest payments, with the exception of reportable fringe benefits amounts, or RFBA, which we can see down here at the end. Now, one thing to note, you'll see that entering these amounts is optional. If you add an amount, Xero submits it the next time you file with the ATO. For example, Xero will submit the amount if you file a pay run with STP before finalizing the data. You can enter the RFBA straight into the summary, so I can enter 20 here as an example. We can also see it advises us whether or not opening balances are included. So we covered that a little bit earlier. So if you do need to make changes to opening balances at this stage, you can do that straight from here by clicking into the STP settings, and then you'll see that option again of opening balances. So you can click Save and Next if you want to save and go on to your next employee. Just click Save like I am at the moment, because I did make changes, but I don't want to go to my next employee. I want to go back to all employees. So let's click that button. Now back on the Review Employee screen, we can see the button to edit RFBA here. So that's another option for you if you don't do it within the year-to-date summary. So let's click that. And then we can simply click into an amount to change it here as well. So I'll just add another one, and I'll add that for James. So I'll add 40. And of course, make sure to save our changes. So once you've checked all your employees and added in any FBT amounts, it's time to finalize them. You'll notice this Export to CSV button at the bottom here as well. So if you do like to keep records of things filed outside of Xero, you could export the file to a CSV using that. And I can also tell you that there will be an option to export as PDF coming in the near future, but we don't have a release date on that, but it is coming soon. Let's click Next. And we're in the Submit screen. So here you should be reviewing your business details again. So like your ABN and your branch number, and make sure you're filing the correct version of STP. And the BMS is your business management software identifier for anyone not familiar with that one. Underneath, you'll see your list of employees again. And then we have the authorization to file section. And this hasn't changed since last year for those of you who have done this before. You should be familiar with your authorization to file, so if you have the authority to do so, you can just tick the checkbox and submit to ATO. And that's it, we're back on the finalization page. So we can see that the status here is now pending. So it was a status of not final before. And please note, when you finalize your STP data and send it to the ATO, it can take up to 24 hours for the status in Xero Payroll to update. So just bear that in mind if you come in here and the status hasn't updated straight away. Employees will now also appear with a padlock symbol next to them, indicating they've had an STP finalization completed. If you make adjustments in the pay run following the finalization and you need to resubmit the employee, you can actually unlock them using the overflow menu at the end, and then you can repeat the finalization steps for them. If you're wondering when the STP finalization deadline is, it's the 14th of July 2023 for the majority of businesses. And there will be a link in the chat that will bring you to the ATO website, so you can find more information there on that. We also have a short and snappy video on Xero Central that goes through these finalization steps, so feel free to have a look at that as well if you want a quick refresher. If you do see a survey pop up after the finalization process, after you've completed it, we do just ask that you do respond to that because we are seeking your feedback on this finalization process. So if you see that pop up, we'd appreciate that you respond to it. Now, while we like to hope everything's ready to finalize, sometimes we do find mistakes and we need to rectify them. Some common mistakes we see at the end of year include allowances processed as ordinary earnings or vice versa, risk processed as deductions instead of as a superannuation line, workplace giving or union fees processed as none or the other way around, and RFBA or lump sum amounts to be added or edited. So with that said, our fourth and last step is process adjustments. With STP, adjustments are easy to handle, and you've got two options when it comes to processing the adjustments in a pay run. The first option is the quickest and easiest, and that's to use an unscheduled pay run. And the second option is to revert the last posted pay run to draft, edit what you need to, and repost. Of course, this option only suits if the mistake was in the last pay run, so it's probably best to stick with an unscheduled pay run. Now, if the mistake relates to a pay item being set up incorrectly, just make sure you don't change the name or tax settings of the pay item. This is because you want to be able to reverse the original transaction. Once you've applied adjustments, don't forget to file those pay runs to the ATO for STP and repeat the finalization process again for those affected employees. Now, I realize that may sound confusing, so to make this clearer, we've actually created a mini case study just to show you how easy processing an adjustment can be. So my employee Odette is entitled to a $500 laundry allowance each year, and this has been paid to her during the year as earnings. Her employee summary isn't showing the allowance separately and instead is grouped under gross earnings, which wasn't picked up during finalization. So we need to process the adjustment. So let's jump back into Xero and fix this up. Now, a note here is if you are making any adjustments, make sure that the STP finalization process is completed before you file the adjustment pay run. So let's make sure for Odette here that this is the case. So we can see that she does have a padlock symbol next to her, so that indicates the finalization process was completed for Odette, and the status is pending as well. So let's go to the pay items section and we're going to check how the laundry allowance was actually set up. So we'll go to our payroll menu and we're going to go to our payroll settings again and back into our pay items tab. Okay, so we want to find our laundry allowance. Okay, so that one is here. And we can see that it's actually showing as ordinary time earnings as the earnings category instead of an allowance. So that will explain why it wasn't reporting correctly, as the earnings category determines how it's reported in STP. Now remember, we don't want to make changes to the existing name or the tax on pay items we're adjusting. So we're going to go ahead and add a new pay item. However, I do recommend slightly renaming that existing pay item so you can easily tell which allowance is the correct one. So to show you this, I'll go ahead and change the laundry allowance. So I'll just go to the edit from the overflow menu next to that one. And then I'm just going to add in old at the end here, just to make it really clear. And then we'll make sure to save that one. And also, once you've made all your adjustments related to this old pay item, don't forget to come back here to this page and mark this item as inactive. So that will prevent similar mistakes from happening in future. So it's very important. So for example, for this one, I would come back here after I've made all of those adjustments to the overflow menu and then just make sure to mark as inactive. I do also want to point out here that if you do change an existing name in error, you can just use the audit history section at the bottom to see the details of those changes. So you can go ahead and rectify your mistake. So now we're ready to create a new pay item. So we'll go to the add button here. And of course, this time we definitely don't want to select ordinary time earnings and make the same mistake again. We want to make sure we select allowance. So first I'm going to make my earnings name clothing allowance so that it is, of course, very different. For the allowance type, I'm going to select laundry. I'm not going to add a display name for this one. And my rate type will be fixed. Now, the reason that I'm choosing a fixed amount is because Odette gets a laundry allowance every week and it's always the same amount for her. For this amount field, I'm going to leave it blank as every employee gets paid a different amount for this. Next, I'll choose an expense account. So I'll select wages and salaries. And then we have some checkboxes. So for today's example, I'm just going to make the first two exempt, but please check with the ATO if you should have exempt PAYG and SGC. As I said, this is just an example. And again, for this example, I'm just going to make it reportable as W1 and add. Just going to double check on this page that everything is correct there. So my clothing allowance is set up as the allowance earnings category. So that's what we want. So now we are ready to go ahead and process the adjustment in the pay run. So we're going to go to our payroll menu again. So I'm sure you're very familiar with that. We've gone into it lots of times today, but this time we're going to go into our pay employees. And we're going to add a pay run. So click the add pay run button here. And we're going to select an unscheduled pay run. So next I'll select the relevant calendar. So this is weekly for Odette. And we want to make sure that the adjustment will be in the correct financial year. Now you might remember I talked about checking payment dates earlier, and it's very important when doing adjustments that you make sure the pay run is in the correct financial year so that it's accounted for correctly. So I'm selecting the current financial year here, but just note that if you are doing this after the 1st of July, so if you're doing an adjustment after the 1st of July, then of course you will need to come in and select the previous year. Lastly, for the pay period, so we see lots of pay periods available to select there. I'm just going to select the last pay period in the financial year, just so that we can tell that it's an adjustment. Now, as this is unscheduled, we do need to tell Xero who is included in this pay run. So to include an employee in the pay run, we can just click on the circle next to them at the very end in the included column. So I'll do that for Odette. And we can see the green tick has appeared there to confirm that Odette is included. Now, before we post that pay run, it's really important that we make any relevant adjustments to the payslip. So we'll open up Odette's payslip. So we'll just click on her name there. I want to remove everything here that's not relevant to the adjustment. So all of the other earnings, deductions, annual leave, etc. So everything is removed there except for the superannuation line. And of course, we don't want to remove that as you can't process a pay run without a super line. Next, we're going to click Add Earnings line. And we want to select the incorrect allowance we used to pay this to Odette. So we're going to select the laundry allowance old, click OK, and then we can enter our amount. Now, some of you might be surprised by this, but you can actually enter negative pay and leave entitlement. So we are going to enter a negative amount here of 500 because we do want to reverse this amount. Then we'll add a new earnings line. And this time we want to select that new rate that we created. So that was our clothing allowance. We'll click OK and we'll enter the positive amount of 500 to balance that off. So we'll click away from it. And in just a second, you should see this automatically update to 0. Always gives me a bit of a fright when it takes more than a few seconds. There we go. It always happens eventually. Great. So the employee's net pay is now 0, but we can see that the adjustment is being accounted for. So we can go ahead and post that pay run. Oh, we'll save it first. Go back into our breadcrumb link there, and then we're going to post that pay run. And of course, we do want to make sure that we file this to the ATO as well. So we'll go into the file button here. We'll accept that authorization and submit to ATO. Great, so that one is now filed. So we're going to go back to Odette on the finalization screen so that we can resubmit her records to the ATO. So we're going to go back up to that payroll menu, into our single touch payroll, and into our finalization tab. So you might remember I showed you earlier, we kind of unlock Odette. Maybe I clicked it earlier actually, or maybe it's because I resubmitted it to the ATO. So if this did have the padlock symbol still there, you would just go there and click the unlock. So if we're to do it for Tracy, for example, you can see the unlock button there, but we can see that Odette actually does have an available checkbox that we can tick. So she is already unlocked from resubmitting her new payslip to the ATO. So I'll tick that for Odette, and then you can just go through those finalization steps again for Odette and just repeat those steps from earlier. So that is it for processing the adjustment. So if you were a bit unsure or maybe even nervous before about having to make adjustments, I'm hoping that you're feeling reassured now that it is a very straightforward process. So I'm interested to see how your confidence levels are now after all of that. So I'm going to actually launch that same poll from the start of the webinar. So that should pop up about now in 2 seconds. Oh, sorry, one second. I just need to stop the other poll. Now, you should see that there. So how confident are you now with completing a year-end payroll using Xero? Again, if you can't see that poll, it might be hiding behind a window or it might be on another screen. So we'll give you all another minute or so to answer. Just make sure that everybody is having the time to participate there. Okay, great. So we've got 85% of you. So I'll give you another 10 seconds. The results are really amazing, actually. Very, very big jump in confidence level since the start. So that's so good to see that we have increased those for you today. Okay, I'll give you 5 more seconds. Perfect. So I'll end the poll now, and I'm very excited to share the results. So you can see that only 2% of you now are not confident. So that is a huge jump in confidence levels. There's a lot more of you that are very confident. So nearly a quarter of you, 50% of you are confident, and then about a quarter of you are somewhat confident as well. So that is brilliant to see. And thank you everyone for participating as well. Now, just to remind you, for those of you who are still not too confident or still only maybe somewhat confident, remember you do have that checklist and the on-demand video available to help. And if you haven't opened up that checklist, you should be able to find the link in the chat that Nicole shared earlier. And of course, you do have access to the on-demand recording of today's session within a few days. So I could see some questions popping up about that in the Q&A as well. So I'll just answer that one for you. You will have an on-demand recording available to you within a few days. And you can also check out our short video on the STB finalization, which I mentioned earlier as well. So you've got lots of different resources to help, as well as the checklist also. And of course, that was a lot of information. So let's just recap what we covered today. So we covered reviewing your business and employee details, including your pay items, reconciling your payroll transactions with your account, which reports to run for this, and the checks to do beforehand. We went through the full STP finalization process. And we finished with how to make an adjustment following STP finalization and some reasons why you may need to do this. Of course, you don't need to remember all of those steps. You do have that checklist available for you to review and go through while you're completing your end of year payroll. So let's actually jump into that now just to have a sneak peek at that. So you'll see that there are lots of, all of the steps are there with lots of detail. And there are even some tips and tricks along the way as well. So that's a great resource for you to use. And of course, you can find that link in the chat box. So it should be a nice, smooth process for you. Remember, just like when you make a cake, make sure to follow the steps in the right order and use the right ingredients so the cake is a success.